My mother-in-law mocked me at her anniversary and made fun of the baby that I lost when I was pregnant, but this backfired at her in the worst way possible and she is now paying the price. My husband Mark and I have been together for nearly 8 years. He and I are quite happy in our marriage, but when it comes to my husband's parents, there is always a bit of conflict. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law has always harbored negative feelings towards me right from the moment we got engaged. Phil was sweet, but he would always let Mill walk all over him and mostly kept to himself. My husband comes from a more affluent background than I do, and my mother-in-law has always viewed this as a reason to dislike me. From the beginning, she would act like me belonging to a middle-class family was somehow wrong. She would make comments about my looks, my outfits, or my shoes. I admit I was not self-conscious before, but I would always dress up appropriately regardless of who I was meeting. However, it was never enough, and due to her incessant comments, I started to buy expensive clothes specifically to wear on occasions when I had to meet her so she would not look at me in pity. On one occasion, I wore a white shirt that she had seen me wear a month ago, and Mill immediately made a comment about how I was repeating my clothes and that well-off people don't do this. She sneered at how embarrassing it was. My husband did try to stop her, but Mill would knowingly make these comments in front of everyone so I would be red-faced in embarrassment. She would even force me to go shopping with her, and she would buy me the type of clothes that I didn't even like wearing. However, I would gratefully accept her gestures and would thank her sincerely. I always made an effort to nurture a positive relationship with them because I genuinely believed she would eventually warm up to me. But then things started to escalate, and the strings-attached aspect of their generosity became apparent. While we were still less than a year into dating, I got a job in a really good company that allowed me to upgrade my lifestyle significantly. Mark was really happy for me, but when mother-in-law found out, she was not happy. She started to call me and text me, demanding that I let her know exactly how much I was earning since, according to her, females in their family should always earn less than their men. I was really offended and pointed out to her that I was bound to earn more than my husband in the long run since I work in the pharmaceutical field, which is really lucrative. Mills started to then tell me how I was allowed to do this job if I wanted, but when I would get married to Mark, I had to leave it so that other family members don't talk about how Mark is not able to provide. This really made me laugh, as it was not the 1950s anymore, and Mark never had a problem with my job or my income. I decided to talk to Mark directly about this and let him know how his mother was making me feel uncomfortable. He was furious that she had been contacting me and texting me about all this. I don't know what he talked with Mill, but she called me screaming and crying about how I'm trying to drive a wedge between her and her son and how I'm the devil incarnate. She said she would never allow Mark to marry a woman like me and that I needed to up and leave him. I cut the call and blocked her because I was starting to get really tired of her toxic behavior. That was the first major red flag. Of course, Mark and I never broke up, but it did make me wonder about the type of mother he grew up with. Through the years, I could not completely cut off Mill since there were several family occasions where Mark was invited, and I would have to go as well, where she would be there. Mill would completely ignore me and act like I didn't exist. For example, if we walked into Mark's cousin's birthday party, everyone would greet us, and Mill would come rushing to hug Mark and ask him about his day. If Mark tried to bring me into the conversation, she would look around disinterested and would quickly change the subject. The one pattern I began to notice was that she would always bring up her health issues and tell Mark about how she was getting old and frail and how one day she could just drop dead, so he needed to take care of her more. Even though she had absolutely no health issues whatsoever and was perfectly fine, it was weird the way she would try to manipulate her own son to get some emotional appeal and attention from him. When Mark proposed to me after years of dating, he had invited everyone to our engagement party. My parents and grandparents were really happy for us, but I can't say the same for my husband's parents. Mill came to our party with a scowl on her face, and her face went down even more when she saw the ring on my hand. She started to tell Mark how disrespectful it was for him to buy me a bigger ring than the one she got from Phil. Phil tried to stop her, urging her to not make a scene, but Mill kept saying how her son could not do anything good for her yet he is doing everything for this poor girl. This pissed me off, so I told her that if she could not respect me, then she needed to leave. Mill was shocked to hear this, but I knew I could not let her ruin the happiest day of my life, and that too in front of my entire family. Phil escorted her out while she kept yelling for Mark, who had my back. Later, Mill called to apologize to Mark, saying how she was drunk, even though we all knew she hardly drank a glass of wine. But because Mill was apologizing to both of us, we decided to let it slide. Then came the planning of the wedding. Mill insisted that she would be included during my dress shopping, saying how she has always wanted to do this. It's important to note that during this time, my patience with her was already running thin, but she was the mother to my fiancé, and I could not blatantly be disrespectful to her, so I allowed her to come. I did warn my mother and cousin about it, so they were ready if she pulled any stunt. Just like clockwork, as expected, Mill had a problem with my dress. She told me how sophisticated people didn't wear so many laces and demanded that I should wear a more traditional white dress. I refused, and my mother told her that I was not her daughter, so she should keep her mouth shut. Mill got pissed and started to pout in a corner with her arms crossed like a toddler. Throughout the time I tried on clothes, she would be nothing but nasty toward my dress choices. In the end, I did decide on a dress, and we paid for it. Mill then came up to me and told me how she was glad that I picked up the dress because it made my arms look fat, and giggled. Hearing this comment, my mother, who had been incredibly patient, started to yell at her and admonish her for her immature behavior. I was on the verge of tears because no one wants to hear something like that about their dream dress, and I am not even fat, so I could not understand why she would say something like that. We let her know that she was going to have to find her own way back home since I had picked up everyone that day, and I refused to let her come back with us since I knew she would continue to say things about me in the car. Mill started to freak out about how I could not just leave her, but that's exactly what I did. While I was on the way to drop off my mother, I got a call from Mark, who started to ask how I could ever do this to his mother and how she had called him crying, accusing me of leaving her knowingly. I told Mark that I would explain everything once I went back home, but he continued to berate me. So my mother, who could hear everything since he was on speaker, let him know that he had no idea what his mother had done to us the whole day. She continued to list one by one how Mill had behaved and, in the end, asked Mark if he thought this is how well-respected adults behave. Clearly, Mark was embarrassed since he had no idea about the whole story. Obviously, Mill had not told him the full picture. Anyways, later, when he came back home, he apologized to me again. He told me how he just freaked out thinking his old mother was left all alone, so he reacted that way.